Welcome to the School of Rock Bottom with Oliver Mason. I'm an actor, a performing arts school principal, a mental health coach, and a voiceover artist. And it's these careers and passions combined that have given birth to this podcast. Those working across the creative industries are 3 times more likely to have a mental health problem. And those working in entertainment and performing are twice as likely to suffer with depression and up to 15 times more likely to have an anxiety disorder. So on this podcast, I invite incredible creatives who have survived a rock bottom. And they're here to tell you loud and clear that there is always hope and there is always, always a way out. I am so excited today, and she's travelled all the way to from Coventry to see me, and that is the jubilant Jenny McDonald.
Thank you. I wondered what word I would get.
I know. I need a thesaurus to come up with some new ones. Definitely jubilant is the right word for Jenny. So before we kind of jump straight in, I've got a nice little blurb here for you, just so the viewers and listeners can learn a bit more about Jenny. So here we go. At school, Jenny McDonald loved drama. It was a place to escape and be someone else. It didn't matter what size the character was, as that was the character's body, not Jenny's. She left school at 16 to pursue a career in acting and attended Birmingham Theatre School for 3 years before landing her first job touring schools across the UK. Jenny loved working in theatre and education and went on to tour schools in Italy. She soon realised that she enjoyed running workshops and directing more than she did being on stage. Maybe this was imposter syndrome and an easy way out. Maybe she was tired of the constant audition pressure. Jenny went on to set up several youth theatres, wrote and directed various shows, and in 2004 landed what she thought was her dream job in her local theatre. It was this job and other circumstances that led her to rock bottom and triggered some huge life changes. Now, fast forward to 2023, Jenny is now called the Food Freedom Fairy. She empowers serial dieters and emotional eaters to break free from the dieting cycle and find peace with food, and most importantly, with themselves. Like many, Jenny struggled with food and weight from an early age, and by age 12, she was a size 16. She picked up unhelpful messages about food being good and bad, which led to secret eating and shame and guilt around food. In 2004, Jenny was a size 24 with a BMI of 43, so she started to repair her relationship with food and lost over 40 kilograms. Elated at a transformation, Jenny left her career in theatre to work in the dieting industry. Years later, she noticed many clients were repeating the cycle and never maintaining their weight loss. What's more, she was still stuck in the cycle herself, just on a smaller scale. Jenny knew she had to do better for her clients and herself, so she left the dieting industry and set up her coaching practice. And in 2020, Jenny released the Power of Food podcast and founded the Becoming You Academy. Amazing. The Academy teaches women how to nourish their minds, body and soul and enjoy cake without guilt. Most importantly, how to love yourself and be unapologetically you. Jenny is a certified and accredited health and life coach, trained in CBT and energy healing modalities, the Helix method, and theta healing. Wow, that's impressive.
Thank you.
You're really welcome. And I'm so glad you're here today. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
You know, I like to just get straight in there on this podcast. I'm going to ask you maybe the hardest question of all. If you could take our listeners and viewers to your rock bottom moment. I think you've actually got 2 that you want to share.
Yeah.
And use all of your amazing storytelling skills that I know you have to really take us on that journey. And we're just going to kind of pan out from that point after that.
Sure. Okay, so the first rock bottom moment was when I was a teenager, and as the listeners have probably realised, I have quite a tricky relationship with food, quite suffered with disordered eating, but at the time you don't realise that is what is going on. You just think that you're overweight, that you can't control yourself, and that you're not like your friends. And my real low moment at school, and this probably went on for some time, was I remember sitting on the bathroom floor sobbing with my mum, begging her to not make me go to school because I was being called tree trunk legs. I was Big Mac because my surname is McDonald. And it just wasn't a pleasurable place to be. You know, they say schools are the best days of your life. And it really, really wasn't. I don't have fond memories of school. So that was a real low. But that was also, looking back, what started the whole cycle to my second rock bottom. And that was the dieting cycle, because my mum, as any good parent would, was desperate to help. And it makes me, as a parent now, to think what I was putting my mum through, and how heartbreaking that must have been for her. But her answer, and she was doing the best she could, was to put me on a diet, was to teach me how to restrict food. I remember joining a dieting club at 12, 13, maybe even only 11. And looking back, I can't believe I was accepted to join and to sign up to what most people sign up to, is a lifelong membership. Once you start dieting, for most it is forever. But this perpetuated my eating problems, and I became a secret eater. So my food was restricted, which meant I would get food from other places and hide it under my bed and go and sit in my bedroom and eat. So that was a real, a real difficult point. But fast forward to the age of 26, and I was a size 24. I landed a job at my local theatre, which what I thought was going to be my dream job. And unfortunately it wasn't. And I would come home every night and just sit and cry and eat and cry and eat. And I didn't know how to get out of the cycle. I was in a relationship that, if I'm honest, had run its course. I was in a job that I really, really hated, and I was in a body that I literally loathed, and I couldn't bear to look in the mirror. If I was going out with friends, I would drink a bottle of wine before I left the house just to feel comfortable. Yeah, so that was a really, really low place, but that is what has triggered everything that's happened since.
Wow, thank you, Jenny, for sharing that. It's going to be very relatable to a lot of people, and I really can applaud you for coming on, because I think this is going to help literally thousands or millions of people. Should I get enough viewers and listeners? There's a couple of things I know on your journey that I wanted to probe you about that's kind of got you to this place. I know that obviously the work that you do now as a counsellor, you like to go back into childhood and look at the relationship with food from that angle. There's a couple of things listening to your podcast that I wanted to probe you about. I know you talk a lot about your parents making a thing of clearing your plate. I just wanted to ask you about that. What role did that play? Because that's something that I think a lot of people have heard growing up, must clear your plate. Why was that such a sort of a powerful statement from your parents back then?
Well, I think I was certainly the child that wanted to please. I wanted to be the good girl. And if you're praised for clearing your plate, whatever you're praised for, you do more of, don't you? If you want to be that good girl. So if my parents said, you can't leave the table till you've cleared your plate, and then, or if you're good and you clear your plate, you'll get an ice cream, then you learn, okay, well, I need to finish everything that's on my plate. But the way I talk about them now is they're really outdated messages, because the message clear your plate it comes down from when food was scarce, when our grandparents were rationed, and clearing your plate was pretty important then, because you didn't know when the next meal or how much food was going to be available next time you went to collect. Whereas nowadays, for not for everybody, but for many of us, food is a little bit more abundant and available. So I think that message has definitely stuck with me, and it's something I still struggle with now. And I know that a lot of the ladies I've worked with, and a few men, but they still struggle with that, because it's almost like you're looking at this plate and it's like, well, I've paid for this, I can't waste it. So then you finish it even if you don't want it, even if you know your body is completely full.
Yeah.
And I remember a little bit of a revelation of seeing my younger brother, who's 12 years younger than me, carry his plate out to the kitchen with 2 chips left. And I was like, what's wrong with your chips? Why are you not eating them? And he was like, I'm full. And to me, that was really confusing. It's like, why would you leave 2 chips?
Yeah. Absolutely. And maybe, if food is scarce in the family, you could always rephrase it and say, well, put it as leftovers for tomorrow. If that is an issue around wasting food, rather than clearing the plate because it will go in the bin, it could just be, well, actually just put it to one side in a Tupperware container and you could always eat it tomorrow. Another way of framing it, I suppose.
Yeah.
I know as well in your childhood you had quite a traumatic experience. You were ill, I think, and you ended up in hospital. And I think you lost quite a bit of weight.
Yes.
And it seemed like that kind of made a bit of an imprint on your brain about the meaning of food and reward. And I just wondered if I could probe you a bit on that.
Yeah, so I've got a really, really strong memory of being about 3 or 4 and being carried into an ambulance. I, until that point, was a very slight child, very slim, and I had a bronchitis, chest infection that was quite severe, and it was in the time where the parents wouldn't stay in hospital with the child. So I was taken away in this ambulance late at night, and I wasn't going to see my parents till the next day, which was pretty horrific. I've got an 8-year-old, and when I think of that happening to her, it's just awful as a child to be going to this strange place with people you don't know. And I was in hospital for quite a few nights. And I think because I was quite poorly, I was then underweight. So I think, again, that was where praise of eating was a big thing, because my parents wanted me to gain weight because they were worried about my health. So I think that's where it really started of, you're a good girl. But I also think there's some sort of deep belief that maybe I didn't consider till many, many years later, of my weight keeps me safe. So if I stay overweight, then and I'm poorly, I've always got something to fall back on. So I definitely think there's a bit of a block for me going too low with my weight.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And I think the brain does something similar, doesn't it? When it has excess calories, I think the body wants to cling on to them, doesn't it? Just in case there's a famine or you run out of food, which I guess is part of our evolution when that might happen. So I suppose if those two beliefs join, it's going to become more powerful. Yeah, I suppose. It sort of sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that maybe your parents were. It's a slight more emphasis on food, I think, than say my upbringing. I can relate to clearing your plate, and I can relate to, my dad's sort of a bit of a Norfolk lad. He'd sort of say, "Get it down, you boy." But I don't know. It sort of comes across to me that it's a little bit more than that. The emphasis around well-being and sort of longevity was just a little bit extra. Or have I got that wrong?
No, I think my family definitely were what I'd call a foodie family. When I look at my nan struggled. She was already signed up to that dieting for life. My parents weren't, they didn't go out and exercise. The only time I ever remember my mum exercising was to take me to a Keep Fit class to help me lose weight. And I don't think my mum necessarily struggled with her weight till after she'd had us, that kind of don't lose your pregnancy stone, and then a bit more goes back on with the second. But they definitely weren't a food conscious, eat healthy kind of family. And I think the other thing is we grew up in the 80s where all of a sudden takeaways and freezer food was becoming more of a thing. You know, we had the Iceland coming up, the Findus crispy pancakes, which are just, you know, horrendous when you think about what's in them. But my mum was a working mum and we lived in a hairdresser's. So she would be at work and we'd be in the house next door. And when we were old enough to cook, we would come in and put our own food in. And sometimes, that would be a homemade spag bol or something. But other times it would be freezer food. It would be go and get yourself some fish fingers and oven chips out of the freezer and beans. And whilst that's okay, that's, you know, I think that become like my go-to sort of food. It was easy. You threw it in the oven. So I never really learnt to cook. I never really learnt about vegetables and things, and they became something that I would then see as diet food. Yogurts, vegetables and fruit. It was always like, well, have some of this to fill you up, and that turned me off them because it was just a diet food. So I got a bit of a, you know, I didn't enjoy them because that's what my mind told me they were. So I definitely think my upbringing and the fact that my parents didn't necessarily have a great relationship with food had a massive part to play.
Has their journey with food changed with yours in any way? Has your experience sort of enlightened them in their lives in some way, or is there still a bit of a disconnect? I appreciate that's slightly personal question there to ask you about.
No, it's fine. There is still a disconnect. My dad struggles, my mum struggles, but my dad struggles more since he's stopped working, and they are still in the cycle of, I've been good, so I deserve this.
Right.
I really encourage my clients to stop talking about food as good and bad, and to stop talking about yourself as being good and bad.
Yeah.
And, just last week, I went in with my little girl and my mum said, your dad's been really good this week, so I'm making him this.
Right.
And I was like, have you not listened to my podcast? Have you not? Do you know what your daughter does? You know? And it's really hard because that is so deeply ingrained in them, and I don't want them passing that message down the generations either. So, you know, I always kind of, I don't want to say correct, but highlight that let's not talk about food like that, especially not in front of my little girl and things. But I think my mum is definitely more aware, but I think that relationship with food is so ingrained in them. And unless they actually take some steps themselves to do that work, I don't think it's going to radically change at this stage.
Gotcha. Right. I know you talk about reward quite a lot as being a big part of your journey, and obviously to the wider population. I think everyone can relate to, you've been good, so you're going to get ice cream or whatever it might be. But I suppose on a scientific level, it's obviously a key component of that dopamine reward system. And it's actually, I think, third on the list that the amygdala looks out for survival. So it will sort of tick off. I mean, obviously it's looking at your immediate surroundings. Is there a bear or something else? And then it will deal with temperature. Then it will deal with hydration. And then it's food. And obviously all of these things give a hit of dopamine, because then it reinforces, actually, I need to do this to survive. So that's very useful to get a hit of dopamine when you eat, because then you'll do it again. But I suppose the problem is, and there's been a lot of science around this for years, and I don't know why food addiction is not spoken about more. I don't think it's spoken about nowhere near enough personally. But of course, superfoods, as sometimes they're called, when I say superfood, I'm not talking about one of those really healthy superfoods. Foods that are like high fat, very high calorie, give a massive hit of dopamine. And some of the research that's been done in the last decade, I mean, there was one around rats where, they got over their cocaine addiction quicker than their junk food addiction, and their dopamine base levels went back to normal quicker on cocaine. I mean, that's just astonishing. You quite generously share in your podcast that you have an addiction to food. When did you come to that realization that you had a food addiction?
I think probably my late teens. It was just, I just didn't know how to stop eating. I desperately wanted to change my body, but it was just like, no matter which way I looked at it, I was so compelled to eat in the moment over choosing to go for the walk or choosing not to eat or choosing something more nutritious for my body. So yeah, I would say it was in my late teens, probably when I was training in Birmingham at drama school, because I think I realised, there was a lot of additional food creeping in at that stage. You're starting to get your own money a little bit more. You're rehearsing late into the evenings. So it was, I was getting my hit wherever I could, if you like. And it is a hit. You're right. I always say it's like eating an apple or some hummus is so different to the hit you would get eating a bar of chocolate or and the food manufacturers, they're not silly, are they? They are spending a lot of money making these products, I don't even want to call them food, because actually, when you step back, a lot of them are not even, do they qualify as food, some of the things that are packaged up these days? But they spend a lot of money making them taste that great and having that perfect amount of fat and sugar to give us that hit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to say the chain's name, but I had, I had a takeaway last week, and the fries alone were 1,000 calories. Just the fries, which I think is about half my daily, or nearly half a man's daily amount of calories. That's just the fries. Yeah. And I was thinking, wow, I almost didn't want to know there was that's insane. 1,000 calories for a side. That's what we're dealing with. I think food addiction gets quite a bad rep, like drugs and alcohol do. That people turn around and go, people are just greedy, or people, they just need to cut down. And I think, like with all addictions, it's nowhere near that simple. And it takes a gargantuan effort. Number one, to realize that that's what it is, and then to break that cycle and that relationship down. In some ways, I've got more compassion for people that are addicted to food, because you can't just abstain from food. You can't just cut it out. Whereas with drugs and alcohol, abstinence is often the best way. But I did notice on your journey with food, I wanted to come to this a bit later, but I think it's a good point to talk about, that you did break your relationship with food, actually, and you found a way, I think, to be abstinent for a while around food, to break the cycle. Could I just ask you about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking that we were going to come to that, because that's exactly like you say, a lot of substance you just stop. I'm not saying it's easy to stop, but you abstain and you don't have them again in your life, and you can't actually do that forever with food. I did do that. I did it for 6 months. I did a meal replacement diet. So basically, I didn't eat conventional food for 6 months. I went through Christmas Day, cooked Christmas dinner, and sat down with a milkshake. I went through birthday celebrations, and I was just so determined. And what kept me going was the weight was coming off, but I felt so much like control. It was like, wow, I don't have to eat. And once you'd kind of broken that cycle, it probably took about 2 to 3 weeks to completely break that cycle of eating. But then it was just like, if I could never eat again, I would be okay. But the fear of going back to food was just horrendous, because it was like, am I going to be able to control myself? What if I eat one thing and then I just can't stop? And I think whilst I'll always have a little place in my heart, if you like, for meal replacement programs, because it really did change my life, there is so much other work to do, and you can't actually do that work whilst you're on it, because you're not testing the boundaries with, it's like you're not going to the social occasions and having to make the decisions about what you put on your plate or what meal you order, because you are just saying, no, thank you, I'll just have water. So, but I think having worked in the meal replacement industry for quite a long time, so many people said to me, if I just never had to eat again, I would be okay. But we have to eat to live. So it is a real, it's I'm not saying it's any easier than any of the other addictions, but it is definitely, any harder, but it's definitely to have to go back to that substance. You know, I always liken it to, it's like saying to an alcoholic, you can have 2 glasses of wine a day, but then you have to stop and you can't have any more. That, like, for me, that is how I was with food for a very, very long time. Right, Jenny, you can have breakfast, lunch and an evening meal, and you can eat these nourishing foods, but then you've got to stop. And if you get offered that, you can't have it. Yeah. And that's...
I mean, I think the parallels to drugs and alcohol with food addiction is unquestionable, talking to you about it. And I haven't had lots of conversations about food addiction with many people. It's usually around, in the work I do, drugs and alcohol primarily. But, you know, looking at your journey as well, the parallels are clear to me, particularly the secret eating, you know, and then you said, you know, being powerless to kind of stop, you know, worrying about it. One diagnostic I always use is with people that are struggling with drugs and alcohol is, can you be sure that you can stop at one? And if the answer is, well, maybe, depends what day of the week it is, you know, that means you're powerless over it. And it sounds like you had a similar problem with food, but then you've got the added problem of, I can't just cut out food, you know. And just like drugs and alcohol, I believe anyway, you have to have a period of abstinence, but abstinence isn't enough. You've then got to work out your relationship. Why are you using this thing to self-medicate or cope with life? And it sounds to me that that's what you were doing. You just described that, didn't you, in 2004 with that job, that you'd go home, cry, eat. You know, that's almost like drug behavior or alcohol behavior. And then, like I just said, the secret eating, you know, that's a huge red flag with alcohol and drugs, you know, particularly with alcohol. You know, are you hiding bottles from your family? It sounds like you were doing that with food. Yeah,
100%. Very, very similar to someone that's suffering with alcohol, drugs, whatever. Yeah, it is an addiction, or it certainly was for me. I'm not saying it is for everybody that suffers, but yeah.
And even that mechanism, because we know that food is a reward, but in terms of dopamine, you actually get a little hit of dopamine in the expectation of the reward.
Yeah.
And then if you add secrecy into it, you then get more of a spike. I think other chemicals come into play, noradrenaline and other things, because you're aware that you're doing something wrong because it's secretive. And people who have problems with drugs report similar things, that they even get a high from scoring drugs.
Yeah.
Because of the danger involved to it, and, you know, the fear of getting caught. It kind of adds to a more intoxicating high. Yeah. Jenny, I just wanted to ask you about what sounds really traumatic was the bullying at school. Particularly in a period of your life in puberty where I know I was very sort of aware of my own. What was that period like? Because it sounds like the more you were bullied, the more you'd then be prone to eat. Is that what happened?
Yeah, 100%. Because you're getting all these negative comments, and then you'd go in that diet starve cycle, starve, eat. I don't use the term binge a lot because I never classed myself as a binge eater, but looking back, I probably was binging. But I definitely felt it's a way of self-soothing, isn't it? And when you are feeling any sort of discomfort, you find a way to make yourself feel better. And for everybody, that way is different. Some people will go for a run. For me, it was eating. So I would come home, I would feel sad that I'd been tormented at school. It'd be going over and over in my head. Why me? Why am I so different to my friends? Why can't I control myself? But the only thing that seemed to kind of just numb that pain a little bit was eating. Yeah. So it was that vicious cycle. And, I think there's two things going on, probably like, again, many addictions, that you've got the physical cycle and the mental cycle going round together. So physically, you'll try and skip meals because you want to lose weight, but then your body's getting hungrier and hungrier. So then at some point, your body's giving off those hunger signals and saying, give me some food, girl, I'm really, really hungry here. But then you're mentally trying to starve yourself because you're like, I'm not eating. And then at some point they both crash together. You eat, And then you go through that shame and guilt and, you go back through the cycle. Okay, well, I'm not going to do it again. I'm not going to eat tomorrow, or I'm not going to eat for the rest of the day. And
gosh, it sounds really, really horrific the way you're describing it. Really, mentally torturous, like an alcohol or drug addiction. It's incredibly powerful what you're sharing, and I think it's going to help an awful amount of people. Is this where sort of acting and performing came in your teenage years? Is it too easy for me to go, you were struggling with food and you were being bullied at school, and then you discovered performing and you could play these other characters and kind of forget about what was happening? Was that?
I think that's exactly what happened. I got into drama in the last few years at school and realised that, well, I thought I was quite good at it. Getting imposter syndrome now. But I thought, I'm quite good at this. It's a subject that I like. And I just loved the fact that I could be somebody else, and it didn't matter if that character I was playing was, an overweight maid, because she was, she wasn't me. So that was great. It was like an escapism. And then going to drama school again, I got to just be somebody else most days. So I think that masked how I was really feeling, because I could just go to another world and play the character. Except when it was costume day, then that made me feel physically sick because of my larger body and having to be measured for costumes and stuff. I can imagine that would be really, really challenging. And in terms of your time at drama school, how was your relationship with food during those that 3 years, was it? Yeah. I think that's where I probably continued to develop pretty bad habits. I used to get the train every day, so I'd have a little snack on the train. We'd have a proper full lunch. I'd be going home and eating late at night after rehearsals. So I think habit-wise, it got worse. And then probably overindulging at the pressure of shows or audition times because you were nervous. So the emotional eating definitely carried on, but I think that I embedded more habits, unhelpful habits at that time. And what was the catalyst for you to make this change and this weight loss journey? I know you said at your heaviest, I think you said you were at size 24. Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Was it around that period? What was the sort of breaking point? Because I think one of the things that struck me as well around food addiction is you mentioned this relationship you were in, and that you both had an unhealthy relationship with food, and that was all you had left. And you hear that a lot with people who have problems with drugs and alcohol. They're in a relationship with someone who's also got problems with drugs and alcohol, which I thought was another interesting parallel. Was it around that time? And what was the kind of straw that broke the camel's back?
Yeah, I think what happened was I tried a couple of things, like I'd been on a pill from the doctor, and I'd had a small amount of success, like maybe a stone, but then it would go back on. And then when I was working at my local theatre, and I was, as I said, quite unhappy, well, very, very unhappy, I think it was the only thing left I had to control. And it was like, I couldn't finish this job. I had to stay at least till Christmas time because we were working on a project. And it was like, I just needed some way out. And I read in a magazine about this woman's success. She was my height. She was a similar size to me. I could relate to her. So I went to kind of seek the same help that she had. But even then, I did not think I could stick to that. I didn't think I was going to be able to abstain from food. And I remember the first couple of weeks just, literally standing in the kitchen with a piece of cheese thinking, I just need to eat something. And then no, and, putting it away, walking away. But I think that just being able to take control of some area of my life was what I needed to do. And that's what I managed to do. And
I think during that journey, I don't want to quote you incorrectly. Were you losing like a stone a month?
Yes.
So I guess that was a huge motivation because you were seeing the results.
Yes.
Stark results quickly, and that probably helped. Did you have any mutual support during that time?
Yeah, so I was attending a group of women only, and if I'm honest, it was probably like AA for women. It was literally a support group, cognitive behaviour therapy, and we worked through various activities that helped us address our relationship with food. So CBT, transactional analysis, delving into your habits, where it all began, the timeline of events leading you to where you were now. And just working out tools and strategies to carry you forward. But as I say, at that point I was abstaining from food. So I don't know, whilst it was helpful, it wasn't until I got back to food that I could really put those tools and strategies into practice. Yeah.
Sounds like it helped you, though, in terms of finding a bit of extra motivation and willpower, that moment with the cheese and the kick, I can imagine. Did you have access to, ring people in those moments? Had you sort of made friendships, or was it all very much in the group only?
No, it was all very much contained in the group. But I was quite lucky. I had quite a supportive family that, even now, I think there would be some people in my life that'd be like, what would you do that for? Just have a salad, just have
people that just don't,
and it's just luckily my parents, I remember at the end of my very first week we went out for a meal for my granddad's birthday, and I just had my first check-in and my group, and I turned up at the meal and my dad said, "What are you having?" And I was like, "Water. I don't want it." And he was like, "Okay, fine." Whereas I think a lot of families would have been like, "Well, you've got to eat something. You can't just sit here and, it's rude. It's rude not to join in the activity, join in the celebration. You're not going to have a piece of your granddad's birthday cake." But I thankfully didn't have any of that. So I did have that support network around me that kept me going.
And that's why I think awareness is so important, that it is like any other kind of mental health struggle when you're going through it. And I think people need to be more educated that if you're on that journey and that's what you want to do, that everyone's got to get on board with it and understand what you're going through. And I think that stigma around food addiction and things like that, I think we've got a long way to go, actually, don't we?
Oh, I think we've got a huge way to go, because at the moment, if you have a disordered relationship with food, obviously if you fall into the category of, severe binge eating or bulimia, anorexia, there are signposts of where you can go to for support. And usually, I'm not saying it's easy to get that support, but through your GP and charities. Whereas disordered eating, if you have a problem with your weight but you don't necessarily fall into one of those categories, then there isn't the help, because what tends to happen is people say you need to just diet, or you need to eat less and move more. So if you talk to a friend, to a colleague, what the conversation tends to go like is, "I know someone that's lost 6 stone on this," or "I know a really good diet, everybody's talking about it." And what you're doing is you're staying in that cycle of, okay, so I need to restrict food. You're not actually focusing on what you really need to work on, which is your mindset and your relationship with food, and more importantly, the relationship you have with yourself. So what you're doing is you're staying in a diet cycle, something you don't really want to do. You're not motivated or driven to do, but you feel like you should do it because you feel like you need to lose weight, as opposed to working on self-love and appreciation. And as I say, working through those childhood traumas or whatever it is. And then I always say, when you make peace with yourself, your relationship with food will just align naturally.
Absolutely. But, as we both know, that's quite a long journey. So I want to ask you a little bit about that, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Obviously, you had some stuff really hardwired in around, you need food to survive, which we all do, but it was exaggerated. You need it as a reward. It's a comfort. It's an escape. How did you start to sort of break down those toxic elements of your relationship with food? What was that like? Because I think you went to is it a weight loss counsellor? Have I got that right?
Yes.
The right term?
Yeah.
What did you start to uncover? And I appreciate you can't just put that in a tidy bow in a paragraph, but maybe a couple of examples of things that you realised were huge red flags around your relationship with food. I know good, bad is
Yeah.
an example of one.
Yeah. So the good, bad, the not wasting food, the clearing your plate. And I think just the fact that I was constantly using food to self-soothe and recognizing that I was using it for different emotions. And what's really interesting is I could spot the maybe stress eating. And I think, gosh, I'm really, really stressed about this. I want to eat, but I'm not going to because I can see what's happening and I could not do that. But the happy eating, the partaking in celebrations, I found much harder to crack. And I don't know what that is, but I'd be sucked into, oh, come on, we're doing this. And I'd be like, oh, okay then. So it's interesting. But I think what I didn't recognize is because I worked in the dieting industry for quite a long period after I originally lost weight, I was still in that cycle on a smaller scale and I didn't necessarily see that. And it was one Sunday evening, probably only maybe 3 years ago, I was standing in my kitchen about 9 o'clock at night thinking, what else can I eat? Because I've got to be good tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, wow, like this is really interesting. I've got to be good tomorrow. And I just sat there and reflected on what I was doing with food. And I was still using meal replacements to substitute food, and during the week having quite a lot of meal replacements, during the day and maybe only an evening meal to overindulge at the weekend.
Right.
So I wasn't actually eating normally. I thought I had a healthy relationship with food. Everyone looked at me and was like, gosh, Jenny, you've managed your weight for so long. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Wow, I'm still in this cycle. And it was at that point that I then, I decided, wow, I need to do better than this. This is not what I'm about. This is not who I want to be, not who I want to be for myself, for my daughter. I don't want her to see that this is how you eat. This is how I live my life. And for my clients, because what I'm selling to them is this, this peaceful relationship with food. And I haven't even got that. So that was another huge lesson. You said what stood out for you. That was huge for me, because I think, again, looking at all my colleagues and all of the people I've worked with over the years, so many of them were still stuck there because we'd learned. And what started as you can have a little bit at the weekend, you can have one day off a week and you will keep your weight stable, had become to me like Friday 12 o'clock to Sunday late at night. So all of a sudden, almost 50% of your week is, or a good proportion of your week is doing the opposite to what you need to be doing to maintain a healthy relationship with food. And it was growing and becoming quite destructive again. So it's been a long process.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And hats off to you going on that journey, because it's a journey that a lot of people don't take. A lot of people don't find the wherewithal to kind of have a really good look at what's going on inside of them and go on a kind of mental health journey. And I think everyone should and look at all aspects of their life, go back into their childhood. I think it's such an important thing to do. People spend so long on their physical health. People go to you never graduate from the gym, do you? You don't sort of go, well, that's it, I'm done with the gym now. It's an ongoing thing. But with stuff around the mind and the soul, if you like it, sometimes people just sort of don't even consider it.
No.
It's an ongoing thing. Forgive a very naive question now. I'll give you a hypothetical situation. Let's say this weekend you've got a niece or a nephew that is having a big party at a fast food burger joint. What goes through your head with a situation like that?
I suppose what goes through my head now is, why would you have the party there and encourage your child to eat such utter rubbish? That is not to say that I never eat utter rubbish. My second thought is food freedom. If I want to eat something there, I will, because I'm a big believer in food freedom. People sit down next to me and go, oh, I shouldn't eat this in front of you. And I'm like, no, you're missing the point. I'm all about food freedom. I'm all about eat what you want in that moment. If that serves you, if that tastes good, if that's going to bring you pleasure in that moment, then eat it, but it's learning to eat without shame and guilt.
Right.
And without regret. That's just being present and enjoying that moment.
So would you go to that event, eat what everyone else is eating, and then sort of restrict calories the next day? I'm only asking you that because it's something that I do, nowhere near on, the levels that you're talking about. But, often say on a Monday, I tend to eat a bit more on a sort of Saturday night and a Sunday. And on a Monday, I might not eat till the evening.
Yeah.
And I've always kind of done that. I've kind of gone, right, well, I've overindulged a bit on the weekend. Is that a good thing to do? Or I know you don't like the word good.
It's really interesting because when you describe it, I look at that as you're listening to your body.
Right.
Your body filled up a bit extra over the weekend, and on a Monday morning, you're like, actually, I'm not physically hungry. I mean, I don't know if you would agree that you genuinely aren't that hungry, so you wait till later in the evening to eat.
Yeah.
Whereas from a disordered eating point of view, I might think, oh gosh, I can't eat because I've eaten too much, or old Jenny, if you like. But yes, going back to the birthday party, 100%. If I wanted that food, I would eat it, and I would probably just be a little bit more conscious of not necessarily needing anything else that day or needing very little in the evening. Whereas the old me would have been like, well, yeah, I've had burger and chips, but I still want my evening meal. And I think that took a long time to undo the fact that if I had eaten a big lunch, I didn't necessarily need much else that day or, a full-on evening meal. But time to eat's a big one. We're all it's drummed into us that you eat breakfast, you eat lunch, and you eat dinner. So that's something else that you have to undo. It's like, for me, it's about listening to your body. The more in tune you can be with your body's needs, when it is physically hungry and when it is full. And when I say full, I mean satisfied as opposed to overfull. And that took me a long time to learn as well, because I think when I started eating again, I realized that I wanted that feeling of fullness because that's what I was used to. And that felt familiar. And I needed to unlearn that because familiar wasn't necessarily good. Eating to the point where you felt really overfull, really stuffed, wasn't going to allow me to maintain that relationship with food that I was working on.
Gotcha. This might be rather tricky to ask you, but I'd be interested to know your thoughts on this. There's obviously a big movement, rightly, around body positivity and if there's sort of an image maybe of a marketing campaign of someone that is plus size, there's often a bit of a backlash. People going, you shouldn't be promoting someone that looks unhealthy. And then you've got other people saying this is about body positivity and people being comfortable in their own skin. Where is the line drawn between sort of body positivity and being unhealthy? I know it's a case-by-case basis, but I wondered what your reaction is to that when you see those kind of debates in the media. How does that sit with you? Sure.
Yeah. No, that's a great question and something to mull over, because my view is if back when I was young, being fat, and I literally hate that word, but being fat wasn't a problem, I would never have been bullied. I might have just found my way with food. Maybe I was overweight for a little bit. Kids, they become overweight, then they shoot up, and then they fill out and they shoot up. Maybe that would have been my journey if I wasn't tormented for being fat. I think when you look at the younger generation, there is a lot of body positivity. There's a lot of teens that are in a bigger body and they're really cool with it, and their peers are really cool with it. Yeah. So I absolutely admire that. There is also a big, and sorry, just to finish that, will all of that generation not have an issue with food because of that, which is amazing. If they don't have those issues with food, I'm not sure that's the case, but in a perfect world, that's what you'd like to think. We're all cool with our size, shape, it doesn't matter, and therefore food restriction doesn't need to be a thing. There's also a big movement called Health at Every Size, which came about from what I can gather from GPs not offering the correct advice and treatment for people with a higher BMI. So often people that are overweight are just told to go home and lose weight. You know, they've got a problem with their knees. It's not your knees, it's because you're overweight.
Right.
So whatever the problem, well, lose some weight, and then if the symptoms are still there, we'll look at it. So then there's this health at every size that, you know, we want to be able to treat everybody with the same respect and give them the treatment that they need. And they shouldn't be discriminated, which I totally agree with. But then you see this being taken to the extreme of, you know, people promoting themselves eating, you know, really nourishing foods and kind of champion that. And it's really difficult, isn't it? It's really I don't know the answer.
Sure.
You know, I don't know where you say, well, let's treat. I think it's about treating your body with respect. I think that is the message we need to be.
I like that.
Yes, body positivity, but treating your body with respect, that it is the most unique machine, if you like, that you're ever going to be in charge of. And it needs to be well maintained. It needs to be treated correctly. And we've all lived through, well, we've all survived a pandemic now. So, you know, our bodies are pretty amazing.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Many people have survived traumas, illnesses, injuries, surgeries. So, you know, treat your body with the respect it needs to be able to get through all of those things going forward.
Absolutely. And I think it's really confusing for people of all ages, with some of the, it feels like mixed messaging sometimes that's going on, and there is no sort of hard and fast answer. But I think particularly for sort of teenagers, you know, you've got one stat that obesity has never been higher, but then you go on social media and it looks like everybody's a fitness model.
Yeah.
It must be incredibly confusing. I'd imagine even for teenage boys, you know, I mean, when I was a teenager, it was actually heroin chic was the thing. So it was all about being sort of emancipated. And, you know, so I've never had that thing in my head that I need to have muscles. But again, I'm sure if you're a teenage boy looking at, you know, a bloke with loads of Instagram followers, they're probably shredded and ripped. I mean, that was never imprinted in my brain as a kind of sort of an ideal body image. If there's a parent listening or watching this who's worried about their teenage, you know, child's weight, I appreciate we're kind of running out of time, and it's what would your overriding message be to them?
Oh, okay, so try not to make food a thing. Try not to, you know, praise or encourage or restrict food, and just. I don't even want to say talk about having a healthy relationship with food, or talk about food being healthy or not so healthy, because even then you're pinpointing that some foods are better than others. But it's such a fine line, isn't it, between not making an issue and wanting your child to have that relationship with food. So definitely if they're struggling with their weight, definitely don't make that an issue. And there is a great book called Body Happy Kids. I think it's Molly Forbes, and she even does workshops in schools now. And she is a great person to look at, and the book is great to read from a parenting point of view. But I think, yeah, if I could go back and tell my mum, it would be don't restrict my food, don't make an issue about it. But equally, as a parent, I'm still trying to work that out with my little girl. You know, she loves ice cream, she loves sweets. It's summer, she wants to eat ice cream every day. And I'm just like, oh, you know, I don't want her to think that filling your body with sugar every day is the way forward. But I also don't want to be the person that's restricting and saying you can't eat that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in an idealistic world with any kind of addictions or disorders or mental health stuff, you know, it would become a kind of thing that the whole family gets on board with. I know obviously that is very idealistic and often doesn't happen. But I'd almost sort of encourage, if a parent is listening to this, you know, to reach out to you, you know, speak to people that know about this stuff. Because I think sometimes when the person is suffering, the parent or the friend can kind of go, well, that's their problem to sort out. But actually, that, you know, you can reach out to help to people that know, who might be able to advise how to manage a situation and maybe produce an even better outcome because of that. And I think you're saying loud and clear, aren't you, Jenny, that, you know, if anyone's listening to this who was your size or indeed bigger, that there is a way through this. You can lose the weight, you can rebuild your relationship with food, and you're living proof of that. You know, so thank you so much for coming on and,
you're
you know,
very welcome.
And helping everybody so much. Obviously, in the show notes, there's going to be loads about Jenny, but just to reiterate that, of course, she's got her brilliant podcast. I'm going to be shouting about that, which is absolutely fantastic. So it's the Power of Food, the Power Over Food podcast. I want to make sure I get that right. Go and check that out now. And also, there's going to be lots of links to how you can connect with Jenny, both on social media, but also, I'm guessing, professionally as well. We'll have some links there because you do counselling and
I call myself an emotional eating coach, a food freedom coach. But you know, I'm always happy to answer questions. If someone's listened to this and thinks, "Oh, I'd just like to know your thoughts on whatever," then my inbox is always open. I just think if I can help someone get out of the cycle that I was in, and you know, make a difference in that way, then feel free to message me.
Oh, that's amazing. And very generous of you as well. And, you know, we were chatting just before when we were having a coffee, you know, with both our podcasts, really. Our main objective, and it always has been since day one, is if it helps one person, it's worth it.
Yeah.
You know, I'm on this will be episode 11, I believe. And a few people have sort of come up to me and said, "Oh, you know, well done on the podcast, really enjoying it. What's the end game? You know, what's the end goal?" And I think sometimes people think, well, you know, it's X, Y, and Z. And it's like, it's already been achieved.
Yeah.
If this is helping one person. And I think with both our endeavours, if that's always the goal, I don't think we're going to go wrong.
No.
You know, so hats off to you. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. I appreciate being here.
That's been brilliant. And I could have chatted, as always, much, much longer. Guys, thanks so much for spending the last hour with us. As I said, all the show notes are going to be written up. So check that out. And please like, subscribe, share, follow, all that stuff. A review. Apparently, if you review this, that helps the algorithm. So I'm all for that. And as always, I will see you in 2 weeks' time. Look after yourself, and thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Jenny.